We'll get started in just a few minutes. I wish I could properly show you what a mess my apartment is right now, because I decided that I was going to do... Let me backpedal. So I wanted to decorate my apartment for Christmas, because 'tis the season for seasonal depression, and I thought, I didn't do anything last year, and it was very sad to me that I didn't do anything last year. So I was like, I'll do something. And I had this idea. I didn't want to get a tree, but I have this really nice archway, like, by my front door. And I was like, oh my God, what if I could, like, do, like, garland kind of around the archway and, like, do lights throughout it. And maybe I could even, like, hang a few ornaments on it. Like, I really was like, oh, this is a great idea. I have two archways, so I was actually going to do both of them. I didn't get enough garland to do both of them, so I'm just going to do the one. And my apartment just looks like a bomb went off right now. Like, it really looks like, you can see I got halfway, okay. You can see I got halfway through doing it. The lights are ready. Like, those are the lights that'll go on the other side. I have another garland on the floor. Because there's just boxes. There's command hook tape. I don't even know. And but I think it looks good so far. So I'm pleased with that. But and I have some stockings up. Again, I don't have a fireplace. I don't even have a radiator that has a wall over it. So I was like, well, I guess the stockings are going above the bar. That seems very festive. So that's what we're doing. And then I have some kind of like funny Christmas cards that I put out on dresser. But that's all I got. But I think this is gonna look good. I'm optimistic. There was a lot of engineering that went into this. The command hooks were not my friend today. The command hooks wanted to make me lose my mind because they literally just would not stick to the wall. So I ended up just deciding that basically I don't know if anybody wants to hear Grace's engineering, but but all of my family members who are engineers are going to be very proud. I decided that since the most weight-bearing part of these garlands is really kind of like the corner, I was like, okay, that's where I'm going to put a nail on each side. And I got some wire that I wrap around the garland and then kind of wrap around the nail. And then I'm using a couple command hooks, kind of like there's one at the top for each of them, again, to kind of put a wire around the garland and around the command hook so that it kind of like positions it. It's not really weight bearing, it's more just keeping it in place. And then I have one on the side, kind of low, again, to just kind of keep it in place. That's the best I can do, okay? And so I think I'm doing pretty well I'm getting away with doing this with only two nail holes in my wall, which I already have other stuff hung up. Like when I move out, we're gonna have to fill some holes that we had things hanging. It's fine. I just hope it's not too obvious the rest of the year, but I could just like leave them too, for next year when I have to do this all again. I did feel like every dad ever when the Christmas lights kept getting all tangled as I was trying to wrap them around the garland. I did want to just give up. A couple times when the command hooks fell down, they did hit me on the head. Thank you for your concern. The doctor says I'll be fine. But it was very painful, to my ego, solely my ego. So I think it's going well. So all in all, I think it's going great. I do have to fix an area where because I have the, I don't know if anybody cares. And it's 6:30, so we can begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Recon, the Redress live stream, where my name is Grace. I'm one of the digital organizers at the Redress Movement. I do this live stream every other Thursday at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time here on twitch.tv/the Redress Movement. Whatever it is, I don't know the handle. Anyway, if you're interested in the work that we're doing, you can follow us at any of the accounts listed down here. Over here is our email. If you reach out to this email because you want to learn more, you'll be connected with one of our digital organizers. Unless you live in Denver, Charlotte, or Milwaukee, in which case you'll be connected with one of our field organizers that's working in that city. That being said, this is my last live stream of the year. Sad. So very big, exciting things happening in the new year. I do hope to take this show across other platforms. So the same live stream, but just be streaming it on other platforms to make it a little more accessible. And I want to have a ton more guests on. I'm getting some new technology that should... Santa is bringing me some... I'm kidding. I'm getting some new technology that should allow me to host multiple other people, which I think will be really great. So we will not be... Our schedule would have said we were streaming on the 29th. We will not be streaming on the 29th. And I will be back on January 12th, which will be right before my birthday. So anyway, so this is our last live stream until 2023. Big things. It's been a great year here at the Redress Movement. We've gotten a lot of stuff done. We really only got to like our current staff of folks. Some of them have been on for... a lot of us just came on this year. So it's really exciting to think about the things we've only done in like 8 or so months as the staff that we currently are, but it's really exciting to think about what we'll do, you know, with a full year together and in the years to come. So that's my little spiel. That's my little sad end of the year, like last day of school before break kind of thing. So yes, usually we use this time to talk about things related to housing segregation or the work that's going on in relation to redressing housing segregation and the history of it. Today, however, I am taking not really a detour from that, but I wanted to talk about something a little bit more just movement and organizing related, as we're kind of like winding down the year and getting into a time where a lot of people take off, take vacations, rest, recuperate. I want to talk about what I'm calling burnout and other movement killers. I think this is really important because I'm going to get into why it's important. A lot of you are probably familiar with burnout as a term, so I'm going to be talking mostly about burnout, but I'm going to address a couple other things that I'm affectionately calling like movement killers, meaning they just make us lose steam or lose momentum or stall in some kind of a way. And this is not a criticism. This is really just like something to bear in mind as we are out with the old and in with the newing, you know? So yeah, our check-in question today, we always have a check-in question, is actually, you'll see it'll tie to what we're doing a little bit later. But it's, what are the gifts and strengths that you offer the movement? Everybody has something different to offer. There's so many different roles in movement work. You know, there are storytellers, there are healers, there are, people who plan actions, there are people who raise funds. There's so many different roles that you can play, but what are your special and unique talents and gifts that you bring to the movement? And they can be anything. They don't have to just be, hard skills. They can be that you're an artist. They can be that you're a great communicator, a great storyteller, that you have a calming, healing energy, whatever it may be. So if you're watching in real time, I would love it if you would drop it in the chat. If you're watching after the fact, you can leave it in the comments. I want to know. I want to hear it. Yeah, do I have to answer this? Oh, I didn't think about this. No, shoot. I didn't think about my own answer. I always do this. This feels awkward because I'm like alone. It would be better if I could like read other people's first, but now I feel kind of awkward. I think one of my special or unique talent or gift that I bring to movement spaces, I'm gonna say, is just my creativity. I think that shows up in a lot of ways. I think it shows up in the ways I think about communicating something that's different, that nobody else is doing, that maybe reaches an audience differently. I think it shows up in when I'm part of planning actions, thinking creatively about a way to get our point across to our targets or to influence our targets. I think requires creativity. And I also think there have been projects I've been a part of that just artistically asked for creativity. Sometimes we're conveying something that's really abstract or really technical, and so finding a way to creatively convey the message or the point to somebody is really important to me. And it's a creative challenge that I love and it's a great part of my job. So I think that's a me, Mario. But please answer the prompt in your own way. I would love to hear from you. So we're going. So let's get into this a little bit. So I'm calling today's episode Burnout and Other Movement Killers. So burnout, I'm trying to find, I found a definition of burnout. Let me see if I can find it. Burnout is when, it can be a physical or maybe a mental manifestation of overworking yourself, right? Of being stretched too thin and now feeling exhausted and lack of motivation, and just like no inspiration to, do your job or to do other things. It can also manifest as like a lot of anxiety or depression in some people. And I think this is a pretty common experience that most folks have experienced at one point or another, or maybe multiple times in your life. When will my tirade against these fire trucks end? Anyway, so there's different movement killers besides burnout. Burnout is one example. Burnout is kind of, I think of like an individual problem, but there can also be group problems, right? This time of year especially, people can be very prone to feeling burnt out. You have usually a break coming up. There's so many things that have to happen before the end of the year. You have familial obligations, you have work obligations, you have friend obligations, you have maybe just your own self-care obligations, and it can just be a lot on anyone's plate at any one given time, and it all seems to happen all at once towards the end of the year. It is so easy to get burnt out in movement work. I think it's a very common experience for a lot of reasons. One, it can be because a lot of people are doing movement work on a volunteer basis in addition to a full-time job, or maybe 2 part-time jobs. And so that is like a lot, right? I mean, that's just adding a whole nother set of, a whole other part-time job to whatever other work you're actually doing for pay, and you're doing this work for free. Not to mention if you have a family, if you have other obligations, if you have other hobbies or things you do, it can be a lot, right? So it can be very demanding on the amount of time it takes. It's hugely emotional, right? Like, many of us don't do this work without feeling some kind of emotional response while we're doing it. So that can take its own drain on us, right? It can be really all-consuming at times, leading up to an action or an event. It can, or something prominent that is an important moment in the campaign or the work that you're doing. It can take up your whole headspace, right? And sometimes it brings up these feelings of urgency, or it can all feel very existential and very life or death, because unfortunately, a lot of times some of the things we're organizing around, if they aren't addressed, they will lead to people, possibly being homeless or not having access to basic needs or being harmed in some other way, right? It can mean life and death. So it can really just take up your whole mind, body, spirit, right? And often on top of that, many of us who choose to do this kind of work, we can often feel like we're not doing enough in spite of that, in spite of what we give all of the time, in spite of doing what we can. We may still feel like I'm not doing enough. And if you feel that way, I want to implore you that, you probably are doing so much great things, and you shouldn't feel like you're not doing enough, because you're doing a lot. You're doing what you can. And that's kind of what we're going to get into a little bit more. On top of all of this, right, is you have the stressors of just life that we live here in the United States, right? Including the pandemic, which is not over and is still a stressor on many of us. So, you have the stressors of capitalism and white supremacy and homophobia and sexism and all of these other things combining on us constantly, right? Which create their own stress and anxiety and just emotional drain, right? Did I say racism? I said white supremacy. Let's also add racism. So, and then like environmental, like the world's also burning the whole time. So it can be hugely stressful, right? And all of this, having to carry all of this all of the time can lead to burnout. And kind of contribute to some of the other movement killers. I was actually watching Trevor Noah's newest special on Netflix called I Wish You Would. And he was talking about how he was kind of making fun of conspiracy theorists who said that they believed that the pandemic was just the government's way of controlling us. And he said, do you really think the government wanted people to not be, you know, he kind of goes through this whole thing, like going to work at a job they don't like to pay off the debt for the thing they didn't need for and like, you know, constantly in a rat race, essentially. He's like, did you really think the government wanted to control people? They would prefer that instead of being in that rat race, they were sitting at home thinking to themselves, hey, how come a weekend is only 2 days? And I just laughed at that because I think that's been so true for a lot of people, that the pandemic, not only because of the issues it made way more prominent, but just because we had the time and the space, really had a bit of a, well, it's a lot of things, but they had a bit of a social consciousness awakening, right? They realized a lot of things about the world around them that maybe while they were in the rat race, they didn't have time to see. I know that was very much the case for me. I was already doing movement work, but I had literally started 2 months before COVID hit, and that was almost an accident. And I was working in housing justice, which I knew absolutely nothing about. So I became very, I guess the word is agitated during the pandemic, because I was seeing how so many people were, unbeknownst, like we always knew, I had lived in Washington, I still live in Washington, D.C., but, you know, we always knew that there were always folks who were, you know, at risk of being evicted, and that's always the case. But you started to see how many people, for a lot of people, they didn't realize how close they were to losing their apartments, right? They were 1-2 paychecks away, and had never thought of that, but realized there's now no safety net for them, right? Just like there's no safety net for other people already, there's no safety net for them either. And feeling like, how can this be? Like, and you also had people who were, you know, who were now for the first time ever not paying their mortgages, right? And, you know, had maybe never imagined they would be in that situation, but here they are, right? And there's no safety net for them. There's no protection for them. And not only that, but then you had, I know specifically in Washington, you had people who, even though there was, they weren't allowed to evict you, people were being evicted. Even though there was a moratorium, people were still being evicted because they didn't know that they couldn't be evicted, right? Even if they knew there was a moratorium, listen, you see an eviction notice on your door, you don't want the police coming, so you get out, right? And they didn't know, they didn't have the resources to find out, you know, that was illegal, and that actually they could not be evicted and to stay where you are. So anyway, I think and then you also had the summer of 2020, and you had George Floyd's murder, and so you had a lot of other things that were also raising this social consciousness of how does this keep, you know, for a lot of, I know, white folks in particular, it was like, how does this keep happening? And it's like, well, I can tell you how it keeps happening. We can talk a lot about why it keeps happening. It's because we haven't done anything to stop it from happening. And I could have a whole abolition conversation, but I'm not going to touch it right now. Maybe the new year, though. So it was a really powerful time because there was all of these environmental factors. And when I say environmental, I just mean like the societal environmental factors. So there's a lot of things happening in our culture, right? And then the pandemic, that were bringing a lot of these problems that many movement organizations and organizers had been talking about for a long time, but it made them very mainstream very quickly. And you also had this captive population of people that had nothing to do but sit at home and wonder for most of the day. Couldn't go to work, right? Couldn't go to school. Just sitting at home and going like, wow, this is so messed up. This is so wrong. Why is it like this? So we really had that time and that space, right? But then on the flip side of that, like, wow, the fatigue of like March of 2020 through to like August of 2021, I feel like wow, you know? Just so, we were dealing with so many different horrible, horrible things all at once. You know, these events might have caused you to question, but I'm sure for a lot of people at first they just caused despair, right? I mean, you know, it was certainly traumatic, I think it's fair to say, seeing, you know, there was that period of the pandemic where you remember we were all just watching the TV, watching the number tick up, you know, and how horrific, you know, to watch that happen, and how scary and how terrifying, right? And how traumatic to see that happen to your home and your country and maybe people around you, people in your life. So there's a lot of, I will be interested to see, you know, 10 years from now, looking back on it, what we see as the residual effects of COVID, not just the virus and getting it, but actually the life experiences, you know, because I think it's one of those things that, you know, there are generations that are defined by having lived through really traumatic events. You know, you have the greatest generation, right, who gave up for the Second World War. You have millennials who went through, you know, 9/11, and the war in the Middle East, and the war on drugs, and then you have, you know, my generation, which had a couple, actually my generation, Gen Z, I think it's usually they talk about the 2008 recession. That's usually a big one. So it'll be interesting to see how you know, people who analyze these kinds of things fit in COVID, and because it had an effect on so many generations. So now, of course, I find my definition for burnout. Well, burnout is defined as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, which I think I had a better definition. So yeah, I think it will be really fascinating to see, because I think it changed a lot of people's trajectory in life, and for a lot of you, it might have brought you to movement work and community organizing, and if it has, I'm so happy you're here. Me too. And I think that's really powerful, right? And a lot of us were looking for communities during that time too. I think even though we couldn't meet and be in community the way we were used to, I think we also built very strong communities, because there were times when you came onto Zoom calls and you wanted to either talk about the thing you were working on because it was a distraction from what was going on in the rest of the world, or it made you feel like there was something you could do. But there were also times where we just needed to be with one another while we were going through something very hard. And I think having that community, even if it was limited by being through the internet, was very powerful, and created a lot of very beautiful relationships with people and helped a lot of people through a hard time. So, that being said, burnout in particular is so common because of all of these kinds of contributing factors, and it really can be such a killer to movements. And the reason it's such a killer, right, is because we can really easily be like, I have to drop something. I'm doing too much, and I can't decide I'm not going to do my responsibilities with my family. I have to keep my job. I have to, keep up my responsibility to take care of my kids, take care of other family members, take care of my house. I have to do these other things. I don't have to volunteer with this org, even if I love doing it, but something has to give, right? And that's totally understandable, right? That is completely understandable. And, it's unfortunate, right? But, I try to remember that we're trying to build something better, in whatever area of movement work you focus on. We're all trying to build something better than what we've got. We are daring to imagine that the world could be better than what it is. And in doing so, we have to make decisions about the way we want the world to be. And we have to start practicing those things. And so, what we don't want to do is work people into the ground, right? Like capitalism might train us to do. We don't want to do that. I think also with burnout can come a lot of fear, a lot of, insecurity about, well, how is this going to work, right? And also just trailblazing something new is like very draining and very daunting, right? So imagining that, hey, all we know from our experience living in the United States, if that's your only experience, all we may know is a very hierarchical power structure, right? There's, to put it very basically, right? There's a teacher, and they have the authority in the classroom over the students, and there's a principal who has the authority over the teacher and the students, right? Very fundamental example. But daring to imagine, like, what if it didn't have to be that way is a huge lift, because it's easier to fall into these patterns that we know. So it leads to that burnout. It's a contributing factor that, like, well, I'm trying to imagine something different. I'm trying to practice something different that I've never been taught how to do. I've never had any practice. I've never seen done, or I've only read about people who have done it. I've never been a part of it. But I believe it would be better for everybody. So therefore we're going to practice it, right? But that can be really scary because, like, what if it doesn't work? Well, we always fall back to our patterns that we know, right? And that we feel comfortable with, even if we know they're harmful, unfortunately. So I want to pivot a little bit, because I want to talk a little bit about kind of another movement killer that's related to this. And this is kind of a tricky discussion, shall I say. But another movement killer, can be, I don't know that these are exact opposites, but I'm going to put these two things in conversation with one another, which is a conversation about cancel culture and a conversation about disposability culture. So when I talk about cancel culture, if you're not familiar with the term, cancel culture refers to when, in kind of a very public way, somebody calls out another person for something that they did that they feel was wrong, immoral, against their values, as a way to hold them accountable to what they say they value and what they do. Usually this means, and usually the call out is, we should cancel them, just meaning they shouldn't have their position of power, they shouldn't have their platform, they shouldn't be allowed to be a part of X, Y, and Z thing, they should apologize, kind of any and all of those things. Disposability culture, on the other hand, and again, I'm not trying to pin these two as like it's one or the other, but I've heard this discourse a couple times. Disposability culture focuses on this idea that we don't treat anyone as if they are disposable. So you hear this in a lot of movement spaces, because in capitalism, capitalism tends to think of workers or anybody who is not a resource holder or the holder of the means of production. So look at me, as very disposable and easily replaceable. So think of a factory worker. If you are a singular factory worker and you say these conditions aren't right, this isn't fair, we should be treated better than this, the boss will go, that's really funny, get out of here. I got 40 people in line waiting to take your job. And they won't say shit. Sorry. So I didn't say that. They won't say squash. Anyway. So that's kind of disposability culture. So in a lot of movement spaces, we tend to feel that we don't want to treat people like that. We want to treat everybody as if they're valuable, they have something to contribute. They are not just I always use this expression wrong. They're not a means to an end, right? So they're not just somebody I'm using to do a task, but I don't really care about them. I've built a relationship with them. I understand their situation. I understand what they have to contribute, what time they have, what capacity they have, what they want to do. And I give them the tools and the things to do that. So we have, as organizers, as people who work in social justice, we have enough people to fight. We have enough people to fight. We have enough problems. We have enough people to fight. So it can be even more draining on our already limited capacities at times when we have to also deal with internal problems. because someone in our own group makes the space not safe for everybody. That can look like a lot of different things, right? That can look like someone bringing in their internalized white supremacy into the space, right? It can be someone being sexist. It can be somebody, sexually assaulting someone else. It could be somebody physically harming someone else in another way. It can look like so many different things. It can look like silo conversations that are harmful. So it's like we have enough outward facing problems. And this is the way I think of it. When I predominantly worked in the restaurant industry most of my life. Whenever you work in a restaurant, there's always people on staff that don't necessarily get along. There's always, tempers that flare up between people. It gets very hot in the kitchen. And so sometimes we're not all our best selves, right? But one thing I used to remember and I used to say at many of my jobs was that once it came time to open for service, I would say things like, it's us against them, everybody. Come on, let's do this. Let's get it together. It's us against them. And I don't mean to be hurt. If you've worked in the restaurant industry, you kind of get what I mean. If you never have, it may sound like we hate the customers, and we do, but no, I'm kidding. So what I mean is we're a team and we have to be a united front in what we're doing, because the problems we have shouldn't be the most important thing, because they're going to bring us way more problems and we have to address those, right? We're going to have bigger problems because of them, and we have to be in this together or it's not going to work, right? So that's, I think, a mentality I also brought to organizing, right? And you also there's also a feeling, I think, in organizing that you don't want your adversaries to know what your weak links are internally, right? You don't want them to know, for example, Grace doesn't like so-and-so, so if you kind of pin them against each other, the whole thing crumbles, right? Because that's a weak link, right? And you don't want to expose yourself like that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you want to gloss over problems, right? And harm that happens to your people, right? I've heard it said in many spaces sometimes that, your internal problems should never take away from the work that you're doing for your base, right? Because they have the problems that you're working on, right? And I think that's true. I think that is really important always to keep as your center and as your North Star, right? But at the same time, if you're not treating your staff well, you're not treating your own internal people well, how can you be, it's hypocritical, right? If let's just throw an example out there. Let's just say you're an organization that builds unions, but when your own staff wants to unionize, you say no. How are you upholding your values, right? So it's about that balance of, this is what we believe and this is what we're trying to make our government do and act, and with the values we want them to uphold, and we have to uphold them as well. And that doesn't mean we won't make mistakes. That doesn't mean we won't do it wrong, that we are not perfect, obviously, but how are you upholding that internally, right? So I think that union example is a great example. If you're an organization that espouses the importance of unions, your staff should be unionized, right? Because you believe that workers have a right to a union and that they get the best treatment possible when they have a union, right? I'm just making this up. I don't even know. Some union org is going to be like, this is a subtweet. I'm like, I literally don't even know. Don't look at me. So anyway, so we have enough going on, but unfortunately you always get, there's always people who do harm, intentional or unintentional. How do you hold them accountable? Because I'm always going to be very protective of those who are the most impacted, who it takes a lot of trust building to bring them into a space. And so I'm always going to be thinking about them, and thinking about, is it even responsible for me as an organizer to bring them into this space with this person who might harm them? because they're not coming into this space to be harmed yet again. They get harmed plenty enough in the outside world. How do I protect them in this house that we've built together? So I'm gonna actually take a page out of We Will Not Cancel Us. It is page 44. So this is talking a lot about exactly this, right? So I'm just going to read a couple sections. I'm speaking about what we do when we hear of harm, abuse, or conflict. We as community members, friends, family, partners, coworkers, comrades, people engaged in our own cycles of harm and healing. As movements trying to break cycles of harm and abuse, how do we hold survivors and those who cause harm as community members once they speak up? Currently, a wide variety of harm doing gets collapsed into one label of bad disposable person/organization and receives one punishment, a call out, often for some form of instant cancellation. And in relationship alongside of, sometimes overlapping with these cycles of naming harm and abuse, are conflicts. Our conflicts, our interpersonal disagreements, can currently get escalated into the language and response of harm and abuse. We are afraid, and we think if we assuage our fears and make it safer, we can clarify an enemy as someone outside of ourselves who is to blame, who is guilty, who is the origin of harm. Can we acknowledge that trauma and conflict can distort our perspective of responsibility and blame in ways that make it difficult to see the roots of the harm? Instant judgment and punishment are practices of power over others. It's what those with power do to those who can't stop them, who can't demand justice. This injustice of power is practiced at an individual and a collective level. Then on the next page, I want to see if I want to read this. How do we, in movements, become responsible for each other, accountable to a vision beyond the carceral system that will only come to pass if we practice it in the present? This generation of movements for justice didn't create this punitive justice system. We didn't create the state. We didn't choose to be socialized within it. We want to dismantle these systems of mass harm. I know that most of us have no intention of ever mimicking state processes of navigating justice. The tools of swift and predatory justice feel good to us, familiar, groove in the hand easily from repeated use and training, briefly satisfying. But these tools are often blunt and senseless. Unless we have an analysis of abolition and dismantling systems of oppression, we will not realize what's in our hands. We will never put the predator's tools down and figure out what our tools are and can be. I think there's one more section. Oh, yeah. There's also this one section, and this is kind of what I'm going to sort of ask of you. Asking. Sorry, just let me peek over here. So the end of this chapter has, here are some questions I sit with when I'm asked to engage in a call out. So it's kind of some questions to ask yourself before we call somebody out. So have there been any private efforts for accountability or conflict resolution? Is or are there survivors being adequately supported? Has the accused individual or group acknowledged what they've done, or are they saying something different happened, or even that nothing happened? Has the accused individual or group avoided accountability? Have they continued to cause harm? Has the accused already begun the process of taking accountability? Does the accused person have significantly more power than the accuser? In what ways? Are they using the power to avoid accountability? Is this a demand for process and consequences that will satisfy the survivor, the community, the movement? Is this call out precise? Is the demand for accountability related to the alleged harm? Does it feel like we can ask questions? Is all the attention going towards the person accused of harm? Are we being asked to rush to action? Is there enough time between the accusation and the call for consequences to make sure we know what's going on and what's possible? Is the only acceptable consequence to those making the call out for the accused to cease to exist? Is the accused from one or more oppressed identities? Is there any discernible power difference between the accused and the accuser? Does this feel performative? And so I think these are, I think this is kind of, I wanted to leave with this, or not leave with this, but the reason I wanted to talk about this on the last episode of this year is because I think we need to start exactly what she says. Like, we can't use the predator's tools. We have to start thinking about what tools we have. So what are our tools for holding people accountable that is not, not to say that call-outs don't have a place and a purpose and an effectiveness, because I think they do. They're a tactic, right? But what are our other tactics? What are our other ways? And a lot of them involves, people say there's a difference between calling out versus calling in, which I think is captured in some of those questions about, has there been a private internal dialogue? Has this person been, brought in to speak with, different people about what happened? Because, at the end of the day, there's a difference between someone who is intentionally, repeatedly causing harm and being allowed to be in these spaces, versus, mistakes that do happen that still cause significant harm. But we don't want to treat people as if they're disposable. Not to say some people, we don't learn from, and we say like, this isn't a space for you anymore. But how do we not be so blunt, right? And what are the questions to ask to understand, to gauge these situations? Sorry, I'm just so dry. I think about this a lot, in terms of digital work in particular, because something, if you go on any of our social media pages, you'll see that we have community guidelines, and these community guidelines are, they were really, really important in the way they were written, and they were very intentionally written. I'm actually going to pull them up because I want to read you some sections from it. Because what was important to me, and other people on the team as well, but what we wanted to prioritize was that we wanted very clear guidelines that were about, this is how we show respect to one another in these spaces. It wasn't about, you have to agree with me, you have to be on the same page with me, but rather about how, what do we consider up for discussion, and what do we not consider up for discussion? Because it's not always obvious. And my laptop is really angry that I'm trying to load Facebook while I have so many other tabs open. I can pull it up on my phone. I really wanted to make sure that our online presence in any way was a space that people could ask questions that were questioning us even. But also I was like, but how do I make sure that I'm protecting people, who might be people of color or other marginalized identities, and how do I make sure that I'm protecting them from people who want to say disgusting, horrible, prejudiced things? So that was really where a lot of these rules came from. Okay, so let me pull these up for you. There's a couple different, there's we ask of you, and then kind of we ask that you don't. We ask that you please ask questions when you have them, and answer other people's questions. Sources are greatly welcomed and encouraged. Share your knowledge, stories, and viewpoints. Be mindful of the words and tone we used. Harm is still harm, whether it's intentional or not. Take ownership when someone says you've caused them harm. Second one is use I statements. For example, I believe that, I feel that, in my experience, etc. Respect others' opinions, even if and especially when they differ from yours. Pause before judging, assuming, accusing, and reacting to avoid saying things we will regret later. Third is please think as you interact with others. And this is where it got very specific. Offensive and inflammatory language of any kind will not be tolerated and may get you blocked from our page. You do not need to engage with folks who are breaking our community agreements. Please flag any comments that feel inappropriate, and our page moderators will review and remove harmful posts. Do not spread misinformation. We will delete or hide anything that doesn't meet our standards. Try not to add unrelated topics to the conversation. This is not a space for shameless self-promotion or sharing private information. Commentary in this page should center on educating the public around the history and legacy of housing segregation and steps taken to redress it. Content that slanders, minimizes, detracts, is unfactual, or is unrelated to redress may be removed at the administrator's discretion. And this was the part that I very intentionally added, which is freedom of speech isn't freedom from consequences. Therefore, we reserve the right to block or hide any comments that do not meet our community standards. And I don't want to get into a freedom of speech conversation because that's not what we're here to do. But it was very important to me that I made it clear that it was not that you just had to agree with us. Because I understand that some of the things we're talking about, some of the topics we're talking about, are things that we have not been told our whole lives. And we might think, if that was really going on, I think I would have heard about it. So I don't want people to just take what I say or what we post and believe it. But that being said, our research team does a lot of work to put together, you might have seen our policy briefs or things like that, and provide you all of those sources to investigate yourself. So what I wanted to do was strike this balance between, just because you may disagree with me does not mean I'm going to block you. But if you say racist, derogatory, horrible things, I am going to block you, because that's not what we're here to do. And actually recently I felt that I have had some comments that were people in one of our more recent posts, which was from our corporate landlords policy brief, which you should read. It's fascinating. That's not a joke. It's really fascinating. We had some comments on it that I did respond to because I felt that they misunderstood. There was one person in particular who commented that I think they misunderstood what we meant by corporate investors, and they were thinking of like normal mom and pop people who buy, and a particular individual who's going to buy, say, a building and rent it out, or buy a secondary home and rent it out. And we were like, that's actually not what we're referring to at all. You're right, there's nothing wrong with that. We're talking about like 5 companies that are buying up to 50,000 properties in what are predominantly Black and brown, lower income neighborhoods with a large amount of foreclosures. We're talking about something really, really specific, and what you're talking about is a completely different issue. So I felt the need just to clarify that, right? So how did I get here? Anyway, so right. So that's a way for me that I'm someone made this comment publicly, so I'm going to respond to them publicly, because somebody else may have had that question too, or a similar one. I want them to see as well. If that person messaged me privately, I would have responded privately. But as opposed to, there's been some other posts where they found the wrong target audience, shall we say, and there was really horrible things to say about another human being that we saw that we hid, and there was some feedback from those people that, that's censorship. And I was like, it's not. It's a consequence of your action. You're allowed to post it. I'm allowed to take it down. It's a Facebook page. I'm sorry. You can post it on your own page. You're more than welcome to do that. I won't stop you from doing that. And I don't have power over you, but this is my page, and that's kind of like, this is my house, and I'm allowed to say, you can say that, but you may also face the consequences of it. So I think it's just, as we're thinking about out with the old, in with the new year, I want us to just imagine these things, like what are our tools? What do they look like for holding people accountable? And I think it's better to make these kinds of decisions before harm has been done, or as opposed to during, as opposed to once the harm has already been done, like, what are we going to do to handle this? Like, do it when everything's good, and then evolve it when things get bad. This felt very, I'm saying, peace on earth, and that's really not what I'm trying to do, but I think I'm just in the holiday spirit, because the garland made me lose my mind. So we're going to take a very quick culture break. I actually found, this is where I got our check-in question today from, I'm not even going to, but I found these journal prompts that I'm going to pull up so you can see. I think these would be great if you want to just take you want to jot them down, you can screenshot this. I'll give you a couple minutes, but I think these are great questions for you, as you're taking some time off, which I hope you get a lot of time off and it's restful. But it might be something for you to consider thinking about, as you're moving into the new year, how do you want to do it in a way that's sustainable for you? So you can see I stole the first question, which actually was something it's actually, I loved it because it's something I think about, and it's something I learned from another organizer about, we all have unique gifts to offer. I was like, oh my God, they say it the same way. But I love thinking about how can you deepen them. And I loved some of these other questions, like, what are the signs that burnout is happening? What are your signs that burnout is happening? Because I think it does look a little bit different in everybody. I know for me, as a person who's got a lot of anxiety, generally speaking, my anxiety can get a lot worse. So just because I'm too tired to do a lot of the things that keep me well, right? So that can be part of it. I also like wondering what this feeling of burnout might be telling you. I think that's a really deep question. And I loved the what reignites your fire when you're feeling burnt out or unmotivated, because that's so important, right? Is to do things to counter it as well. Is it just like you gotta like sleep? Is it you need to be around people? I know that I, for example, when I'm feeling very burnt out and unmotivated, often like, especially as it pertains particularly to organizing, being around other people who do this work, whether it's just like, it doesn't even need to be about organizing, but just being around them makes me feel better. Doing one-on-ones with all of the wonderful people that I meet through this work often make me feel like, yes, this is why I do it. I would just thought of something else. Oh, like sometimes I'll watch movies that are somewhat related. I sound like such a, like, I feel like I sound like such a goody two-shoes. Like, I read my books about organizing, and then I read my this, and then I watch a movie about organizing, and that's really not my life. I'm not saying I do all this on a given day, but just these are different things I think of. In particular, I love this book. I have it on my desk. This is what I'm just reading right now, and I just enjoy it. What is in there? Oh my god, my Post-its! I'm reading this book called Shut It Down, and this is a really good book. It just talks through a lot of different actions in Lisa Fithian's life, and it's also like got like pages that are like kind of trainings. Like you'll see just like in the middle of it's like, out of the toolbox 10 tips for successful wheat pasting posters, and I just kind of love it. It's really she has a lot of crazy experiences to read about. So that's just what I'm reading right now, and so I'll read something like that generally. But yeah, so you don't have to answer all of these now. Maybe you've started writing, maybe you've written some of them down. But when you get a chance, answer a couple of these questions. I think it's really, it can also be easy if you're feeling feelings of burnout to not, for example, I found out for me that, I used to think in college when I was not very good at managing burnout, that I used to, I thought this was self-care. I swear to you, I thought I was doing something. I would every Friday take a bath with lavender Epsom salts for 15 minutes. Why 15 minutes, Grace? Because I literally was such a wired mess that I could not sit any longer than 15 minutes. I would set a timer. I would force myself. I'd be sitting there like death gripping the sides of the bathtub, just like, I have to go. I have to get out of here. I have so many things to do. I have to do this. And I would force myself to sit for 15 minutes. And when the timer went off, I would be like a cat jumping out of that water. Just jump out, get it, like shower, get out. Like I couldn't do it fast enough. And I found out that wasn't really helpful. I thought like that's what you should do to be well, but that's not what wellness looks like for me. And that's totally fine. It might look like that for you. I recommend it. But my muscles were like so soft. My muscles were like so relaxed, but like my body was tense. But, I found out now, for example, that actually, like, what's actually better for me? To spend, like, some time really, like, cooking and making myself a really nice meal and putting on a movie and just really immersing myself. And actually, sometimes something that's helpful, this may be shocking, sometimes when I'm feeling really stressed out and really burnt out, I make a list of all the things that maybe I have to get done in a given week, and then I divide them up across the given days in my planner. So I say, okay, I'll do this Monday, this Tuesday, this Wednesday, this Thursday, this Friday. And that helps me too, because it makes me feel like it's not so big and overwhelming. I break it into chunks. And also just, I've learned I have to be really kind to myself about the ways that sometimes I have a problem with thinking that if something's not done perfectly, it's not worth doing at all. And that's really wrong. So like even I love that my garland is becoming such a good example. Even if I don't finish putting it up tonight, if I get too tired, that's okay. It's all right if I leave a bit of a mess in my living room. I'll deal with it tomorrow. That's okay. It's okay to go to bed with a little bit of a mess left in one of your rooms. So those are just things I think about, right? Sorry. I hope I'm not catching a cold. This would really be unfortunate for me. That's how you know I'm burnt out. No, I'm not burnt out. I'm okay. So I'm going to switch back now. So as we're getting close to the end of our time together, I have some closing thoughts. So the reason I really wanted, the point I really want to emphasize here is that the reason I'm talking about these movement killers and these individual issues like burnout is because the movement needs you for the long haul. These fights that we're in, whether it's like social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, etc., have already taken and will still likely take lifetimes to win. That's the unfortunate truth. I think about things like the civil rights movement. I think about even Roe v. Wade. They thought that fight was over. It's not over, right? It's still going on. So it is better for the movement and for you if you find a way to sustain yourself in this work for the long haul as opposed to burning out after a year, because you could burn yourself out really quickly. Some of this work is going to take all of us over many, many years. You're not being able to contribute on Thursdays is not going to make or break it. If you've had a one-on-one with me, I'm so sorry because you've heard this example so many times. But I think of the women's suffrage movement, which was 100 years. There were women that spent their whole lives pushing in the women's suffrage movement and still didn't see that win, and it came a couple years later. But that doesn't mean their work didn't matter. That doesn't mean that it was just those people in that last push that made it. It was a culmination, right? So whatever your contribution was, right, it was important. But how much better is it that you can contribute for 10 years, 15 years, or on and off for 40 years, than to do it once for a year and then you burn out and you can't do it, right? And that's not going to be good for you because now you have to deal with the consequences of that burnout, which might impact other areas of your life, unfortunately, right? What we don't want to do is replicate the capitalist system that works us into the ground and provides no room, no space for stopping, for healing, for rest, no space. We don't want to replicate that. So, I think, and this is why I wanted to ask about your gifts in the beginning, because I wanted you to think about, what do I have to offer that is unique to me, special to me, that also maybe really motivates me, really inspires me, really gets me out of bed in the morning? And how can I give that in a way that is sustaining? How can I give that in a way that I can do long term, right? So I know for me, I said, it was creativity, right? Early on, for me, what that looked like was I was happy to make social media graphics. A lot of people hate doing that. I didn't hate it. I had fun. I enjoyed it. I loved the challenge. I loved the project. I was excited to do it. I had ideas when people would mention it. So that was a way for me to contribute. That, it wasn't a huge lift for me, but it was a huge add to what they were doing, right? Whereas, it might have been, if you had asked me, like, I'm just going to make up an example. If you asked me to write a press briefing, I would have been like, ooh. It would be a lot for me because it's not something I have experience doing, maybe something I didn't want to do. And it would be kind of like a drag for me, right? So even if it took me the same number of hours to do as a social media graphic, it would have taken more out of me, if that makes sense. So this is also why a lot of grassroots and community organizing relies on what is called the snowflake model of organizing. So we, as I said before, we're not consolidating power into any one person, right? That is holding it all together. Because we know that shit happens. This is me. Squash happens. And we know that things happen. And people sometimes have to step away. Or people have to leave. Or people cause great harm and they have to be asked to step out of their position of power, right? So a collectivist structure that distributes the power across all of the people allows for one to step away, but the work to keep going, right? Because it isn't held in any one person. It's held by multiple people. So yes, maybe those multiple people, so for example, if you have a committee, right? There's no like leader of the committee, right? The committee is operating. So if one person who maybe was a prominent voice steps away, well, the idea is that committee knows how to operate for themselves. So they may want to find another person to fill that spot, right? And they may have to take on a little bit more work in the interim, but the work can continue because the knowledge isn't held in one person. The decision-making power isn't held in one person. It's held amongst everybody equally. So I know I just tacked that on in the end there. And I hemmed and hawed about talking about that and like having a whole thing about the snowflake model. But I think I'm just going to leave it there because, it's the end of the year. And did you really want something really technical from me? I should have had some jazz music playing behind me this whole time. But that is all I have for you today. I am looking forward to the exciting new year. And all of the things that we want to do and all of the things that we will do. I'm excited to see those things happen and come to fruition. My name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer at the Redress Movement. You can follow us on all of our social media accounts here. Over here is our email, hello@redressmovement.org. If you want to have a one-on-one with me or you want to get to know more about the work that we're doing, you can always shoot us an email there. And we can get you on our email list or we can have a one-on-one with you. I do these live streams every other Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. However, because of the holiday season, I will not be back until January 12th. So you will see me in the year 2023. Very big things. And I have a lot of exciting things on my mind for this show and for this program to continue to blossom. But in the meantime, in between time, you can keep up with us on our social media. I do hope you have a restful this time of year, however you celebrate it. Whatever you celebrate, I hope it's restful. I hope it's joyous. I hope it's a good time. And with that, I will leave you. If you need any last minute gifts, this is such a random plug. If you need any last minute gifts, you can go on our website. Which is redressmovement.org, and you can check out, we have a whole page dedicated to a curriculum, and if you hit the Learn More button on any of the curriculum modules, it'll take you to some fabulous resources, including some books, if you have a movement-minded friend who you think may enjoy a book on this. Do I have any recommendations off the top of my head? I don't think so. Not besides ones that I have listed many times before. But yes, so with that, I have nothing else. I hope you have a restful end of the year and a joyous celebration into the new year. And I will see you back here and maybe some other places. Definitely here on January 12th and maybe some other places shortly thereafter that. That's it. Good night, everybody.